Hello everyone, it's Elaine. Thank you for joining me here today on my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be sharing a card using the Concord 9th Hello Lovely stamp set along with some Daniel Smith watercolors. So for today's card I'm starting off with a piece of Strathmore Bristol smooth cardstock in my Tim Holtz stamp platform. I've just secured my cardstock down to my base of my stamp platform with some blue painter's tape, and I've popped that stamp. It's quite a large stamp, but I've popped it off to the side, onto the left hand side. I have used my embossing bag all over that cardstock and now inking up my stamp with my Versamark ink. Just inking that up a couple of times, making sure it's nice and impressed well onto the cardstock. I don't want any gaps, and now I'm just coating that whole image with Ranger's liquid platinum embossing powder, one of my absolute favourite embossing powders that I own. It's such a gorgeous colour. I'm just heat setting that with my heat tool, and now it did warp a little, so I'm applying some blue painter's tape. I'm popping it onto just a piece of hardboard, using my blue painter's tape just to secure it down on all four edges, just to try and flatten it out as much as I can. And here I have these dot watercolors. This is the 66 chart. I've got a piece of kitchen towel there off to the side, and I'm using a number 4 round brush from the Silver Brush Company, the black velvet round brushes these are. And I've just applied some clear water, not too much, just a light sheen of water all over these leaves. I believe this is the wet on wet technique. I am no expert. I literally am just playing around for the first time with, first of all, this stamp and also watercolours. I'm listing the colours I'm using on the screen. They will also be on my blog and also in the description box below. So I'm just applying some water and then going in with a damp paintbrush and just grabbing that colour from the dot chart and just putting just a wash of colour. There's no shading or anything at this stage. My first layer is just a wash of colour. Now I'm doing exactly the same for these lovely leaves on the petals on the flower. This colour is Imperial Purple, and as you can see it's a really light layer. Just popping some water onto the image, and as I've heat embossed, it does help to keep the colour within the actual part I'm actually colouring. I did use 2 different pinks, but as you'll see in the images, they do end up looking the same. So for these ones, I'm using Quinacridone Magenta. And I also use Quinacridone Rose for the other flowers you'll see me paint in a minute. But as I said, I'm no expert at watercolouring. I just really wanted to have a go. I'd kind of put off colouring this stamp for quite a long time. I did find it quite intimidating. I'm not experienced at colouring florals. However, if anything, I hope this video inspires you to maybe use something or go out of your comfort zone, because with this stamp and probably florals in general, I don't think you can colour them bad. They're just so pretty, especially this particular stamp. I just think it looks so pretty. You can't really make a mess of it, and I was just really happy with how it turned out. So here you can just see me going back into those elements and trying to add some shading. So in the darkest areas I've added some colour, and then I tap off my brush and go in with another little bit of water and pour the colour out. Very similar actually to how I would colour with my Zig Clean Colour Real Brush markers. I've always got a piece of kitchen towel there. I'm not sure whether this is an actual technique for colouring, but as I said, this is pretty much my first time using watercolours and also my first time colouring florals. So I'm fairly new. But I hope this gives you some inspiration, and maybe the colours inspire you to use a stamp set that you've got in your stash that you haven't used before. I am a real pink and purple person. If you see my Instagram account, you'll see much of my card making includes pinks and purples. So I'd let that sort of dry off a little bit. As you can see, I dropped my brush there, just use some clear, clean water just to help pick up that colour. And I'm just going in with some deeper shade, the same purple, Imperial Purple, but just using some flicks with my paintbrush here just to add back in some shape and dimension to the petals, just following along the lines of where the heat embossing is. Now this colour is the Magenta. Just trying to add some darker colour into the centre of the flowers. And just pulling that colour out, dabbing off my paintbrush. And just trying to get some nice dimension. Here are some more flicks. And I love these dot charts. I would like to get a proper professional set of watercolours, but I think these dot charts are great as a starting point just to play with the colours. I think they're going to last a really long time. I barely even dipped into these colours. I've got plenty of colour left. I'll list or link down below where I purchased my dot chart from, but I think they're quite widely available, so you should be able to pick them up if you're interested. So now I'm just made sure that that paint is all dry on that panel, and I'm carefully lifting up that painter's tape. I'm using my Lacy Layers Waffle flower dies here, the largest rectangle, which is A2 sized, just to run that all through my Big Shot machine and cut that out. I've grabbed some metallic bronze ink here from Winsor & Newton, I believe. I've just got a cheap paintbrush here, popped some of that paint on an acrylic block and just added some extra splatters. The stamp does include a few splatters, but I wanted a few more. And I'm just grabbing my Misti here because now I can work on my sentiment. So just use those magnets there to pop my card panel into my Misti. I popped a piece of acetate into my Misti over the top of that card panel because I think that really helps with lining up my stamps, making sure I'm happy with it. I've gone to the effort of colouring that beautiful stamp. It did take probably about an hour to colour. So if I'm putting that piece of acetate in and making sure I'm 100% happy with the sentiment, definitely is a good tip. I've used my embossing powder or my embossing buddy onto this card panel. I'm inking this up with Versa Fine Onyx Black ink, and this sentiment is included in the stamp set. Using some clear embossing powder here and heat setting that with my heat tool, making sure it goes nice and glossy and turns nice and black. So now I can bring back in the hello. I wasn't happy with how the placement was at first, so I decided to stamp them separately, checking I'm happy with how it's positioned using that acetate sheet again. Bit of embossing buddy on there. Back in with my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Couple of impressions, make sure it's nice and black. Again, cover that with clear embossing powder and heat set that with my heat tool. Wanted to prop this panel up a little bit, so I'm using some craft foam here. Added some liquid adhesive to the back of that. I'm popping that on the back of that card panel here. Pressing that down nicely, making sure it's secure. Just trimming off a little bit here that was overhanging. Using my Tim Holtz shears for this. And to adhere this to an A2 sized card base, I'm just using some double-sided 1/2 inch adhesive, removing that release paper. And securing that down to a side folding A2 sized card base. Being careful to line that up nicely. Pressing that down, making sure it's all adhered nicely. And just to finish off, I wanted to add some Pretty Pink Posh sparkling clear jewels. I'm having a problem with my glossy accents at the moment. All of my fine tip applicators seem to be blocking, so I'm just using a really old paintbrush, just dipping that into the pot and dabbing some little bits of glue, using my quick stick tool here to help me pick up and adhere the jewels. So there we can see how pretty that embossing powder, and I was really happy with how my first attempt at watercolouring went. I hope this inspires you to maybe attempt some watercolouring or pull out a stamp that you haven't used before and just give it a go. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up if you did, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.